Hello and welcome everyone to this exciting session where we will discuss how some of the big corporations are implementing human rights in their supply chain. Now, we have an incredible session ahead of us, but before we get into the details of the session, we would also want to have a sense of where our audience is on this topic. So, we have got two poll questions coming up for you, and we will request you to kindly respond to those, and then we will get ahead with our conversation. So if I can request John to pull up the first poll, which is, do you have a clear understanding of the human rights issues associated with your industry or supply chain? And we see the votes coming in. Interesting. Roughly about 70% of the participants saying yes. We do have a bit of proportion saying not really. So let's see. Maybe we give a couple of more seconds to it. All right, seems to have stabilized. So about 75%. Okay, it's still evolving. Great. So we seem to have a fairly mature audience in terms of knowing what are the issues, what are the challenges, what are the facets associated with the human rights issues associated in their industry and their supply chain. John, if we can close the poll and go to the next one, which is more talking from the company perspective. Do you feel your company is equipped to deal with the human rights challenges in the supply chain? And here we see the situation emerging slightly bit differently. Okay, it's again 50-50, almost neck to neck. A little over 50%, close to 54% saying yes, and about 45%, 44% saying not really. Interesting. So while we see that at an individual level, we do have a good sense of what's happening on our supply chain, what are the issues that we are dealing with, but somehow we feel at the organization level, the same degree of maturity or preparedness is probably not reflected. And it's actually quite an apt reflection, because the session that we're going to deep dive, we're going to look at how some of the leading corporations are addressing these issues, addressing these challenges within their organizational framework to address the human rights. And hopefully, you will be taking a few inputs, lessons, leaves from their books, and will find a replication within your own organizations. So, John, if you can close the poll and we can have the panelists back up. So, the global supply chains are the backbone of the world's economy, and they are the strong force that power its growth and prosperity. However, the benefits of this progress are not evenly distributed, especially for those who are at the bottom of the economic pyramid or largely responsible for cranking this huge engine. And then there are complex socio-economic, cultural factors that are responsible for the evolution of the business practices, and the variation in perception and tolerance across the geographies on what is acceptable, what is not, when it comes to the issues of rights around workers, around communities. Um, all of it makes the workers, the issues around human rights, the communities who are getting touched by our value chains, an invisible cost of this entire development. And it's here that the role of the corporations become extremely vital in upholding the common standards of operations across the spectrum. However, despite the focus on the worker rights as one of the first interventions and the earliest interventions by multinational corporations, and one of the most common ones across the spectrum, we somehow still seem to be struggling on this topic. The people who are trapped in various forms of modern slavery, according to one of the reports by the civil society organizations who did a global analysis, found that the number of people trapped have increased from 40 million to 50 million between the period of 2018 to 2023. And according to ILO estimates, there are 28 million people around the world who are trapped in forced labor like situations around the world. And more worryingly, 63% of them are in private sector. While there have been some great successes in making the workers and human rights an integral part of the corporate sustainability agenda, there are still areas where we need to revisit the conventional business approach. And then you add to it the conflicting, hyper evolving regulatory scenario, where on one hand we have instruments which are focusing on an aggressive approach, while on the other hand we have a counter force acting on it. And this puts the corporations in a big dilemma. And today, to talk about these and much more issues, we have with us the representatives of three of the large multinational corporations who represent three very different sectors and extremely complex supply chains. And we will be discussing with them on how their approach to human rights in the upstream value chain has evolved, and what are they doing to ensure that they are effectively managing and hedging the risk in this very fluid and evolving operational environment that we are in today. I'm extremely happy to welcome our three experts who are leading this challenging topic from the front in their respective organizations, and I will introduce them briefly in the alphabetical order. I'm extremely happy to have Christophe Kikampwa, the Vice President and Head of Sustainable Procurement at Schneider Electric. Thank you, Christophe, for joining us.
Sure, very happy to be here.
Extremely delighted to have Leonard Best, the lead for human rights in procurement at Bayer, and Ronald Jacoby, the Global Senior Manager and Sustainable Sourcing Lead for Forest Positive and Supply Chain Human Rights Program at Colgate-Palmolive. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking time out today to discuss this extremely complex but pertinent topic. Now, the first point that I have for you is human rights is a very complex and a multifaceted topic. It's not like you deal with one issue and you are done with it. It's like onion. You keep on peeling and a new issue will emerge, yet it will still be within the umbrella of human rights. And depending upon what kind of supply chain you operate, what kind of stakeholders you touch upon with your supply operations, there could be a huge variety of issues that you address or that you cover. So, maybe for the benefit of our audience, let me begin by asking all of you, can you please share who are the typical stakeholders that your supply operations touch and the key issues which are associated with them? And how has your approach in the supply chain evolved over time? So, a bit of a nuanced question, but it'll help our audience get a sense and relate more with the kind of operations, supply chains, and the issues that you deal with. And may I come to you, Christophe, to kick off and then go to Ron and Leo?
Sure. So, big question, three parts. I'll try to address it as more efficiently as possible. So, first of all, the nature of our supply base. So, it's quite heterogeneous and I would say somehow complex supply base, largely industrial. We have about 50,000 suppliers covering both direct and indirect segments. in terms of size, suppliers range from large industrial to SMEs, which is the majority, around 2/3 of the suppliers.
Christoph, if I may pause you for a moment, your voice seems to have gone down. Maybe if you can check if the microphone is covered or something.
No, the microphone is not covered. Is that okay?
It's better. Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying in terms of sectorial coverage, it reflects a wide range from raw materials like steel, like aluminum, copper, plastic manufacturers, to electric and electronic components, including PCBAs, also up to fabricated products like molded plastic part or sheet metals work. And in terms of geographical spread, it's almost evenly spread, I would say, across Asia Pacific, Europe, North America, as we have factories spreading around the globe, more than 150 factories around the globe. So that was for the supply base. Now, keeping that in mind, what are the key human rights challenge that we have associated with this supply base? In general, I would say cross-sectorial and regional exposure, exposed to regional variation in the understanding of what is acceptable and non-acceptable work condition. And as you understood from what I just said, Schneider Electric has mainly industrial manufacturing supply chain partners. The main issue that we see are on very different aspects, but I can name some of the top ones. Workers' right with the respect of specific issues on working condition like working hours, overtime, weekly off times, but also industrial safety issues that are common. But also those last ones get closed quickly or rather quickly, while the workers' right issues take much longer to close. Now, how have we been addressing them on a very high level? And I believe we will have time to go into some more details. But in Schneider Electric, we basically evolved from audit, on-site audit, through our vigilance program with corrective actions in nature, I would say, to preventive approach. Focus on helping suppliers to create policies and processes which reduce the likelihood of potential malpractices with our decent work program, among others. We also have a continuous performance improvement program through the ISO 26000. So to recap what I just said, we went from audit to preventive approach while continuously measuring and improve the ESG performance.
Thank you, Christoph. Ron, if I may turn over to you.
Sure. No, absolutely. And thank you, Kanish. I'm very happy to be here. So for Colgate-Palmolive, we are a global household and consumer products company. We make personal care, oral care, home care, and pet care, pet food products. We sell our products in approximately 200 countries and territories around the world. We have 50 plus manufacturing sites now. And approximately 30,000 suppliers spread across 100 different countries. So again, very, very large, complex supply chain. Colgate's one of our purposes is really to help reimagine that healthier future for all. And as you can see, with such a large supply chain spread very, very widely geographically across many products, we have many different types of manufacturers. We have, obviously the chemical manufacturers, but we also have a significant number of agricultural supply chain manufacturers, as well as mining and other types of minerals that go into our products. And those types of suppliers can be everything from very large multinational companies themselves, all the way down to very small local companies. So you're really engaging across a very wide group of industries and organizations. Obviously, in addition to those direct materials, we also purchase and use many indirect materials around the world, right? So we also have those additional third parties, as well as those that are providing goods and services to our business around the world. So whether that's facilities operations and people in our third parties, temporary labor, distribution and logistics and such, it is a very large supply chain. I also do want to mention here, since we are talking a little bit about procurement and the integration with sustainability, I would say that our procurement organization plays a really pivotal role in helping to manage across many functions within our company, as well as with our suppliers, for the implementation of all of our human rights work. So they really do play a very critical role, helping to develop those roadmaps and also engagement with many of our external industry partners, some of whom I'll mention as we go through the talk. Um, if we look at sort of who are some of those typical stakeholders based on what I had just shared, obviously we have factory workers, we have workers in farms, in fields, in mines, and other places like that. So in each one of those types of work, those types of workers do represent very unique challenges as it comes to issues such as human rights. I would say that in general, our approach, very much like what Christoph had mentioned, has evolved over a number of years, focused from what I'll call really more compliance based to a more holistic human rights vision. And you know, we've had our sort of compliance program, what we call our SRSA program, was really started back in 2012, and that program was very much focused at factory level compliance.
Mhm.
I would say as we move through 2018, 2019, our vision shifted, and that vision then was really focused a little bit more on uh, on others within that supply chain. So within the service industry and other areas, providing those goods and services. Um, the other one area that obviously has come into play as we've moved through this is legislations and regulations, right? And what's required to do to meet those. Um, so, you know, if you look at some of our supply chain, and you look at things like, we are a company that does use ingredients such as palm oil. Obviously, there are particular risks associated within the palm oil industry. You know, in places like Malaysia, where you do have a significant amount of foreign labor being brought into the country to harvest palm oil. And the many issues that are associated with that can go across everything from labor practices to forced labor and child labor as well. So there are many different types of potential issues spread across those various supply chains. I would say the other areas that we see as areas that we are trying to address additional challenges is around things like effective grievance mechanisms, is another area that we see as being really important from an area that we're addressing and approaching. I think the other one comment that I'll make is just around the evolution has also been, how do we continue to add new tools to the toolbox, right? We started out doing audits and assessments, but then looking at developing other types of surveys to be able to engage suppliers on some of those specific issues. And we know that audits aren't necessarily the best tool sometimes to be using to get to a lot of the human rights issues that we see in supply chains. So developing those tools and really implementing those across our company. And the final comment that I'll make is that one of the other big areas that we've seen a lot of engagement with is with other external industry groups. So to the extent Colgate is a member of both AIM Progress, for those of you that are familiar with AIM Progress, as well as the Consumer Goods Forum's Human Rights Coalition. So through those groups, they've also been really instrumental in helping us to continue to develop and evolve our program.
Thank you, Ron. And I see the commonalities between what you shared and what Christoph was also mentioning. You know, your organizations, they started off with a core constituency, what a typical, I would say, supply chain organization would look at. You know, the factory workers, that's the core constituency in our supply base. But then you evolved beyond that. You identified a wider ecosystem which is getting impacted by the operations. And one thing which was very interesting, which Christoph also alluded and you also mentioned, was kind of taking a note that audit might not always be the most effective activity to resolve these issues, and hence you evolve, you have more participation from the stakeholders, you have grievance mechanisms, so you go way beyond the audit and try to create these institutional safeguards which help in shifting the ball from a mere corrective to sort of being a little bit more proactive. Yeah. And another point which you mentioned, which was extremely interesting, was collaboration with the industry peers, because that's something which I think now, as we are seeing over the decade or two of evolution of sustainability practices in general, there is a multitude of requests which are going for the suppliers, and we do see a sense of fatigue kind of settling
Mhm.
in, which is very real, and there is a risk that it might just derail the entire agenda. So, and Leo, if I may come to you, uh, does these trends or evolutions also resonate with you, or because you come from a very different sector which is relatively more homogeneous compared to a Colgate-Palmolive or a Schneider Electric? So how do you see your stakeholders in your supply operations getting affected, and the approach being evolving over times?
Yeah, cheers, Kanishk. And I only can echo what Christoph and Ron just have said. And also to your comment, yes, it resonates. And I totally can see that also in our supply chain. But maybe to step a little back and zoom out, in order to understand Bayer's supply chain, I think it's also good to know what actually our businesses is. And here, you might think, okay, it's chemical industry, so it's all the same. But looking into the three different businesses we actually have, it's a crop science business, it's consumer health, so all over the counter, and it's pharma. And adding to that, what Christoph and Ron also said, the enabling services that we need in order to then produce our products and bring them to our customers, you have a huge variety actually of procurement categories that we look into. And they go from active ingredients over raw materials, finished goods, and medical devices, but also include all the technical goods and services we need at our sites in order to produce. And one, I'd say, special focus also lies on our seeds business. So the category also here is of high interest. And then all the other procurement areas like IT, logistics, marketing and sales, and R&D that serve actually our business. So also we are acting globally across all countries all over the world, and this makes it very complex, right? And when we look at the challenges we see here, I'd say we take a holistic approach and also look at the risks that are out there in the area of human rights from a holistic point of view. So you would see working conditions, of course, the risk of child labor, abuse by security forces, but also living wage and living income is of course a topic, just to name a few. But maybe to highlight one specific point, to make it a little bit more tangible, when we look at our seeds business here, Bayer works to prevent child labor through a special program called the Child Care Program. And what we actually do is to establish in India, Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Thailand activities that would prevent actually the child labor issue. And it goes from investigations at grower sites, really going there, checking, to educational work at schools, but also close monitoring and consequence management that range then from written warnings, but also to termination of the contract as a last resort. And when we look at the involvement of this topic and our activities, I would say, just like Christoph and Ron said, we started with a risk assessment. So you want to get transparency on your supplier base. But then soon enough, we added more elements, and we have now a very mature risk analysis and evaluation process in place that then allows us to say, okay, where are maybe our pain points, where are our hotspots, and when we get audit results, what do we need to do in order to react on it and to work with the supplier actually. And in 2023, we therefore introduced what we call the Sustainability Supplier Development Program, something where we, in a collaborative way, work on those corrective actions together with the supplier whenever there is an issue, right? So really also here taking this then more proactive approach in order to battle the topics. And one last thing, and I'm sure that Christoph and Ron also would agree, is that it's always worth engaging in initiatives. And we do it with the TFS, Together for Sustainability, but also in the pharmaceutical area, the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, where actually colleagues like in this round discuss about good ways, good solutions in the area of sustainability.
Wonderful. So in a sense, we do see a convergence of the approaches. It doesn't matter if our organizations are operating in different space and different segment. There is in a sense of evolution, all of us are going a similar kind of evolution, which is sort of more reactive, and then we transition to enlarge the scope of our engagement, become more proactive rather than reactive, and kind of collaborate more with like-minded companies, with peers, so to have an efficiency in our approach as well. Yeah. Now, so this evolution that we are seeing is also kind of giving a sense that rather than chasing the suppliers, we are now asking or making suppliers a bit more accountable for the performances at their end. And let me know if you think it's a fair summary or an accurate representation of the trend or the transition that we are seeing. So from an audit focused approach, let's say a decade back or a decade and a half back, to now something wherein we are more proactive, going on the site, having a more remediation plan, trying to work on preventive approaches. So is this making the supplier an equal partner, and then we becoming a solution provider for finding solutions, creating these new let's say approaches of working? How does it really translate within your respective organizations? Because it also means you yourself have to take a higher accountability, a higher responsibility of finding solutions to some of these challenges, which are not probably a commonplace out there in our operating environment. So can you share how does your companies are leading this transition? It also kind of reflects on the capacity building that you would probably need, as a company, to address or deal with these issues. So maybe Ron, if I could come to you, and you kick it off, and then we see how other organizations are leading this charge.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Kanish, and I do agree with your introductory statement there. I do think that it is part of an evolution of that natural movement, say from compliance, where we're really probably throwing more things at a supplier than with something like a human rights due diligence, where we're really trying to bring them into the fold and work with them to help evolve not just our programs but also their programs, right? So there's definitely those elements of helping to develop capabilities and capacities internally and externally. Um, and I think that I'll also echo your other point about that we also therefore have a role to maybe help bring those solutions and those tools to bear. I'll go back to the one point that I had made before around that movement from just focusing kind of on compliance into the human rights due diligence. And I think the other one big aspect there is that most of the time when we think about assessments or audits, those really are a point in time. And you had also mentioned the ability to be more proactive. So I think in some of these areas, we're also trying to get ahead of many of those issues, right? We're developing tools and processes and policies and programs that can help to detect these things earlier. Um, so I look at that kind of as those kind of going back to the tools in the toolbox, and that everything has a specific function and a purpose. Um, and I will echo the other comment about this is oftentimes not very easy to do within an organization. There's a lot of alignment that needs to happen across many different functions within a company when you're talking about engaging suppliers and implementing human rights due diligence processes, right? Because it's not just about that we want the supplier to do something, but it's also about building our own capabilities and our own structures and our own responsibilities to help have that oversight and governance as we engage with third parties to help move us all in that right direction. So definitely we have been on a bit of that journey. Um, I will also go back to the other comment that you made around collaboration as really being key, because if we sort of have that role and responsibility of bringing the approaches and the tools and things to bear for ourselves and our supply chains, it's really critical that we're working with quality industry partners across various different forum groups, many of whom are the ones collaborating to develop those tools and those approaches, right? I think that for most companies, we would say, we're not independently developing, kind of going out and developing a particular approach. We're trying to use what the industries are providing us and maybe to customize that for our supply chains and for our suppliers. So definitely, again, kind of going back to like some of the groups that we work with, AIM Progress and the Human Rights Coalition at the CGF, a big focus of that work is developing those tools and those approaches, sort of beyond what we're doing as companies, but also engaging with various other stakeholders, right? So other SMEs in the industry, other civil society groups, and ultimately with rights holders themselves, right? Because
Mm.
the reality is whatever we're developing and implementing, it ultimately needs to be useful for them, because that's another really key part of it, as you tie back into things like grievance mechanisms and grievance
Mhm.
management processes. So I think, an example that I'll share is that, through all the things that I had mentioned there, one of the things that we were able to action, pulling together various tools and approaches, was to really develop a very simple human rights due diligence survey.
Mhm.
And it was really something that we could just share with our suppliers and say, you know, do you have a policy? How are you implementing that policy? Are you looking at risks within your own operations and within your supply chain? Um, if you identify risks, do you have grievance mechanisms, right, to be able to address those and resolution processes? And then various other things like, are you training your own people and training your suppliers? So there's many different elements to that kind of human rights due diligence framework that you could lay out there. Um, but ultimately, the idea of that very simple tool was to just get an understanding of a supplier's maturity in that space. And then that opens up the door for us to be able to engage them where they are, right? I mean, we always have aspirations of everybody being much further ahead and being ready to
Mhm.
tackle these things, but everyone's different. And we need to sort of, if we're willing to work with them, we need to meet them where they are. And then we need to help them evolve. And that's sort of the approach that we've taken.
And it's an extremely vital thing that you mentioned, Ron. Uh, because of the sheer diversity of the stakeholders that we touch across the sectors, it's probably impossible to have a one size fits all or a standardized uniform approach. So it's extremely important that we are nimble, we are able to customize our approach and go and meet the stakeholders where they are, and then pull them up, let's say, to the situation or the position where we would want them to be. Thank you for sharing that, Ron. Leo, if I may come to you and request you to share a little bit of how is this transformation happening within your organization. You did mention quite a diverse sectoral exposure as well when you were explaining, the operations and the supply operations. How does that reflect for an organization like you?
Yeah, let me add a little bit of additional complexity to that game, because in Germany we also were struck by the LKSG, so the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, which actually required to fulfill certain due diligences. Now, I would see it as a little bit two-folded. So one is, and you quite rightly said it, one is to fulfill all those due diligences you have to do. But what Ron pointed out, and I really liked his statement on getting involved with your supplier, is how do you engage actually with your supplier, and are you open and willing to listen and to understand what the issue is? So one thing, looking at the regulatory part, we have established what we call the 4-step management approach in procurement, which basically covers the due diligences as they are outlined in the regulatory framework. So it goes from supplier awareness creation. We make our suppliers aware of our expectations. We provide them webinars, information, but also put it into our supplier code of conduct, what we expect from a human rights and a sustainability perspective. The next step, what we do is to analyze our supplier base and nominate suppliers we want to work further with. And we invite them to a evaluation and audit process, because we see here higher importance or higher risk that they are exposed to. And as a fourth step, we then take them into a development, which I mentioned before, where we then would tackle corrective action plans and go into that discussion and say, hey, look, this is what we found out. Our understanding is that, for example, in the area of working hours, you might have an issue. How can we solve this together? And then to close that part, the due diligence part, what comes next, which is the second part, is actually how you convince also your organization. And what we see at Bayer, and you might have heard it in the press, is that we are undergoing a transformation into a more agile operating model in our organization. We call it dynamic shared ownership. And it aims actually to empower every single employee, make them an entrepreneur in the company, and take professional and meaningful decisions, but also the accountability. And with that, we also shifted a little bit the gear towards, okay, for which topic do we need which people, and bring them together in communities of practices in order to drive topics like human rights. Now, I'm working with colleagues that come from the area of seeds, and they say, hey, look, my reality looks like this. And I say, okay, from a framework's perspective, I can support you, but let's talk about what does really make sense in your area and how can we address the topics with your suppliers. I guess lessons learned really from the involvement that we've seen is you need to get the buy-in of your internal stakeholders, meaning your procurement professionals, but also your legal colleagues and your corporate functions. And despite the geopolitical challenges we see and regulatory developments, we need to keep up the efforts, because one way or the other, we will face those topics, and we have to address them. And it's better to be prepared now and to start working than to wait and have a huge pile of challenges that might not seem digestible. So,
Thank you, Leo. I think one thing which is very fascinating that you mention is to overcome these challenges. One of the ways that your organization is looking is to kind of break the traditional, maybe the organizational structure, which often created probably the silos, and it's kind of creating a new wave of collaboration by breaking those traditional boundaries and getting people together. And
Yes.
that is also kind of leading to a cross-pollination of ideas from people who are working on a similar topics, but probably quite far away in different parts of the organizations. And that cross-pollination often leads to sometimes quite, I would say, innovative and effective ways to be discovered for addressing some of the traditional challenges that we may be facing. Interesting. Thank you so much, Leo. And Christoph, if I may come to you, how is Schneider Electric looking at this transition, and what are you planning in this space or are doing in that space?
So let me come back to what I said earlier, and I'll try to go quickly, not to repeat myself. But what Ron and Leo has been mentioning is extremely resonating, and you may hear some of the same items in what I will be saying. So we went from an evolution from corrective to preventive. We went from foundational program to transformational program. Now, how does that translate concretely in what we put in place? So let me describe quickly the different programs. We start with, of course, the supplier code of conduct, stating clearly what we want from the suppliers. It's a basic, we all have that. The next level up, as I was saying, is the eliminating the risk that may reside at our suppliers. To do that, we have a vigilance program in which we're doing a risk assessment every year of our 50,000 suppliers. And then my team is focusing on the highest risk suppliers. We go on site doing a full audit, 2 to 3 days audit, identifying non-conformities. And as you mentioned earlier, working with our suppliers to solve those non-conformities. Or I mean, the purpose of this project, it's not to identify risk and leave the suppliers alone with it. No, it's to work with them. The work starts once we've done the audit and we've been identifying the non-conformities. And the worst that can happen to us, it's that we have to disengage the supplier. I say the worst, and we consider that as a failure in my team. It's because disengaging the suppliers is washing our hands, turning our back, knowing there is an issue, but we didn't solve. So we go up to the limit when the suppliers clearly, or the CEO of the suppliers clearly tell us that they don't want to work on it. Do we like it or not? Very rare case that happened, less than 1%. We then have a program to drive continuous improvement across the board. It's ISO 26000. And here we're focusing that on strategic suppliers. We're using EcoVadis to drive that. But the point is not just to make an assessment of the suppliers, is to have this average score of our strategic suppliers improving year over year. And we set ourselves an internal target as well to reach 65 by the end of 2025. And the last piece, which is the most interesting, maybe, it's the aspirational practices. So going way beyond the regulation, the normative behavior, it's driving what we call internally this program decent work. So decent work we've been defining following the ILO, International Labour Organization, defining on the 10 pillars, more than 60 checkpoints. It goes from child labor, modern slavery, but not just checking a box saying, are we compliant? Because that is not transformative at all, but really asking the suppliers to have remediation plan in place. When we speak about wages in that program, we ask them to have a living wage policy. When we speak about gender, we ask them to have a non-gender family care in place, having paternity leave equal to maternity leave as an example. So we go really way beyond what is normally requested from suppliers. So implementing those, we have been facing a lot of psychological barriers sometimes, stereotypes. You know, people believe that in one part of the world it's more easy than in the other part because it's more mature economy. I can tell you it's totally not the case. We believe sometimes that bigger suppliers is more easy to adopt those than small suppliers. It's not right neither. It's often the opposite. We have been facing as well knowledge of the suppliers, knowledge gap and capacity gap that we need to help them. And so what we've been doing to solve all those is, and you mentioned Leo and Ron as well, collaboration is key. But by the way, it's the first word of our sustainable procurement mission is collaborate with suppliers. So collaboration goes in different ways: capability building, extensive training of the suppliers. You need to embark them, they need to understand, and do not underestimate the need of repetition. It's always good, it's part of trainings as well. Supplier engagement, it's important in each of those, especially the transformative initiative, to make the first step achievable. Don't go in front of a supplier asking, in 3 years from now, I want you to prove me that you've been implementing living wage. No, you start by explaining what is living wage. You ask them to have a policy to publish it. And then you go into the implementation phase. It's also a lot about one-to-one engagement. You mentioned it, Ron. It's meeting the suppliers where they are. And to do that, it's basically, in my team, we have regional sustainable experts in each of the main regions that goes on site, helping, supporting the suppliers to do sustainability development, like we did since many years, quality development with our suppliers. Massive rollout as well. I would say when we're implementing those initiatives, we should not underestimate the time invested in it. You know, for the decent work to get a supplier's decent work compliant, it takes us more than 6-7 rounds. And a round is not just a call, it's a whole cycle of resubmitting the questionnaire, working with the suppliers, addressing the issues that they face. So this is mainly what we've been implementing and what we've been facing and what we had to put in place to accelerate and drive those transformations.
Thank you so much, Christophe. Leo, Ron, thank you so much for sharing these perspectives. There were some more questions, but I think the discussion is so intense and so enriching, and I'm also mindful of the time. Probably just to summarize and pick up key bullets for the benefit of the audiences, we do see an evolution. We started small, which was the known territory, but now there is an increasing trend of going beyond what used to be our comfort zone. We not necessarily always know the answers to the challenges, but we are willing to work with our suppliers, making sure that we are together finding the solutions for some of these, chronic challenges which still exist. Two things, if I may, touch upon, and Leo, you did mention it. And some of the questions which came in also talk about it. We do see a regulatory, let's say, conundrum which is evolving. We had a phase when there was too much of a clear direction in what is the kind of direction we want to move, what kind of actions we want to implement. And then we suddenly see some hesitation from certain regions. At the same time, some other regions are coming up with a countermeasure to, let's say, have an opposite impact on these trends. But something which is very interesting that you mentioned was whether the law asks for it, demands it or not, it doesn't matter, because end of the day, the customers, the stakeholders, the investors, the audience in general know these issues, and they demand the response from the companies or the accountability from the companies. So maybe in quick 30 seconds, if I can have your view on this, specifically Leo, but Ron and Christophe, if you would want to add there. And maybe for you, Christophe, because Ron and Leo have already touched upon it, you did not explicitly mention about industry collaboration. Now, is it something that you are looking at in your sector in the capital goods, or can you share some bits on that?
I can a little bit share about that, but the simple answer is yes. Yes, okay. I'm admiring what other industrial sectors have been doing. When we speak about sustainability, it's to make the most of our energy, and we're the first one not to do that if we're not part of a coalition. We're making the life of our suppliers miserable, asking all the same yet a little bit different things to the suppliers. So combining our energy in addressing this in a coherent way is one key element to optimize and accelerate. So the answer is yes on
Okay.
this.
So although we don't know anything much, but we may expect something, and maybe next year around when we have you, you might also be talking about something which we will be able to follow up then.
Maybe.
Thank you, Christoph. Leo,
Yeah.
over to you.
Yeah, regarding the complexity of regulatories and all the laws and directives out there, I would even say that even within this regulatory framework, it does make sense to get started, because even if now the CSDDD might be postponed, you then have on another end of the Atlantic a Hugo Forced Labor Prevention Act in the US that is also asking for actions on forced labor. And then there are other initiatives and directives maybe coming from the APAC region. So it's good if you stay up on your toes and be prepared, because as said, one way or the other, you will have to cope with it. And especially multinational companies, they are affected even by local laws and regulations. So you better get this then holistically done, and you're well prepared.
Thank you so much, Leo. Ron, maybe the last 30 seconds. We are already over time.
No, I will echo everything that everyone said. Yes, absolutely. It's imperative that companies get started now. And even if you're not, you have to take those first steps. You mentioned earlier, there's not always a clear roadmap for a lot of this. So I think getting involved with peers, collaborating with industry, that'll get you started on the right track and just start doing the work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ron, Leo, Christoph. It was an extremely enriching conversation. I found it extremely enlightening, and I'm sure our audience would have also gained a lot of these practical insights from you. I wish you all the very best in your pursuits and the actions that you're leading within your own organizations. And we look forward to much more interesting insights in the next year's World Sustainable Procurement Day. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you,
Thanks, all.
Ron.
We are SPP, the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, a global community committed to a single grand goal: to make sustainable procurement the default. We think multi-generationally. We make decisions that guide trillions of dollars. We believe that sustainable sourcing practices are the fastest way for us to save our world. This is a call to the unsung heroes, you, the procurement professionals, and your allies. United, we are changing tomorrow for people and planet. Together, we procure the future. Sign the pledge. Activate your power. Join a community that gets it done. Procure tomorrow.